Hello, it's Matt Thomas back again with the Arturia Prophet V for Sonic Academy. So now we're going to look at the two synths that make up the Prophet V. The Prophet 5 we can see here, and if we click this button, the Prophet VS. Or we can also put them together for the 5VS, which is Arturia's layering of both synths into a single machine. So I'll take them one at a time. Prophet 5 first. Now there's a little effects unit up there. We'll ignore that for now and just look at the synth itself. So we've got very straightforward sawtooth. Nothing really clever going on there. So we're going to work our way through the synth, try and see what each of these sections does. And as you'll find, the part of the kind of Prophet 5's appeal is that much of it is very straightforward. It's a nicely flexible but not overly complicated synthesizer. I think the Prophet 5 showed really is that while there are synthesists who want to kind of fiddle with oscillators and mess about all day long with frequencies, there are also keyboard players who just want to play some synth noises. And the Prophet 5 really kind of answered that need by being sort of flexible but also understandable. So given that, I'm going to whiz through these front controls. Now, if you're unfamiliar with analog subtractive synthesis, the basic oscillators, filter, envelopes, that kind of thing, take a listen to the Sonic Academy course on subtractive synthesis. There's an introductory course, and that'll get you at a real beginner's pace through all the ideas I'm talking about. Now, I'm going to assume you are familiar with that stuff, so I'll be talking quite sort of quickly through the oscillators, the mixer, the filter, the amplifier section. We'll take a little more time to look over here, the poly mod, the LFO, and the wheel mod, because it's really in this section that you can start to kind of tap into the real sort of character sounds in the Prophet 5. I should have said earlier, by the way, as you may have noticed since yesterday's fabulously informative and comprehensive introduction, I've managed to snag myself a bit of a cold. I mean, Chris says I should say it's a cold, not that I've been out smoking 40 Marlboro and all that, because apparently that doesn't make the company look good. So I've got a cold since yesterday, which is why my voice sounds so exciting and raspy. So do excuse me. I've got a nice cup of tea over here, which, there you go, tea. That's my mug. Got tea there. You get yourself a tea and let's get started. Right. Oscillator A, very straightforward. You've got two waveforms, sawtooth, square tooth. You turn them on, you turn them off. So to make this simple, I'm going to nip to oscillator B now and turn it off. So now oscillator B is doing nothing whatsoever, and we can just hear A while I work through it. So currently it's a sawtooth. I can switch that off, switch on a square wave, and that square wave can be pulse width modulated with the PW here. All straightforward. You can also layer the two sounds, so you can have a sawtooth and a pulse. And you can move the frequency around. Some synths, this is cut into individual octaves and stuff. On the Prophet 5, you have a semitone switch, so you can go one note at a time. A couple of octaves range there. We'll come back to sync in a second when we've got both oscillators on, but essentially oscillator A, very straightforward. So let's turn oscillator B on. I'll just turn A off for a second. So oscillator B, again a sawtooth, again a square wave. Again, you can vary the width of that square pulse. As you can hear at the very top of the range, it actually becomes so narrow it becomes silent. It's a very tiny, there you go. Ooh, gnat's whistle. Okay, and as well as the sawtooth and the square pulse, you've also got a triangle. Triangle's a nice waveform, sometimes missing on some of the early synths. It's kind of like a sine with a little bit of characters, you can just pick it out. Wonderful soft sound, a triangle wave, do like it myself. Again, you can layer these. See, no point in moving the PW with the square off. I just fooled myself. Okay, as before, we can change the frequency of this in semitones. Again, you've got 2 octave range, but we've also now got a fine control. You can change it in hundredths of a pitch, so all the way up it goes up a whole note, back down to in tune again. Now, as well as these controls we've run through here, we've got two others here, low freak and keyboard. Now keyboard, while it's on, oscillator B tracks the keyboard. It plays essentially the note you expect it to. If I turn it off, I'm going to play exactly the same notes. It doesn't track the keyboard. It becomes a static fixed pitch oscillator. That's no use, as you can understand straight away, for many kind of like nice melodic parts, but it becomes very, very powerful when you're making interesting sounds later on. So remember, we've got the choice to turn oscillator B into a static fixed frequency. I'll turn it back onto keyboard. Okay, the other thing next to it is low freak. When you press this, well, it drops down octaves and octaves and octaves. You can barely hear it. So if I'm playing the very top of the keyboard, you can just hear it as notes. Anywhere lower, it's just clicks. So what's happened is that oscillator has been turned into another LFO. We've got an LFO here we'll come to eventually, but you can turn oscillator B into an LFO, and this LFO plays at different rates depending on where you play on the keyboard. If you turn keyboard off, it becomes a fixed pitch LFO, just like that one. It goes at one rate, no matter where you play it. So that's quite a nice thing to fiddle with. We'll see what you can do with that later, but what this means is that this oscillator B is both a sound source and potentially a very interesting modulation source, particularly if you're using low freak and or the keyboard off. So we'll put it back on for now, turn low freak off. Okay, so that's oscillator A and B, one last button, oscillator sync. If I put the sounds back on again. Okay, so horribly out of tune because that is +1 semitone, drop it down. Okay, in key. If I press sync, oscillator A is synced to oscillator B. The maths of this is that every time one of these waveforms goes a complete cycle, it resets the waveform of oscillator A. It's again one of these things that is easier to hear than just talk about, so we'll switch it on. Now I'll turn oscillator B off. It's still affecting A, but you'll be able to hear the effect on A better if B isn't in the way, okay? So sync off, sync on. No big change because we're not really doing anything different in the frequencies between the two. But if I change the frequency of B, or A, you can hear that A is now behaving very, very differently in its kind of changing of frequency and pitch. So when I move A around, instead of changing pitch as you expect it to, it changes tone. Okay, so basically I'll put it back to 0 again. There it is, playing a D. They're still Ds, but they're Ds with different harmonics. So that's oscillator sync, gives you essentially a tonal variation in oscillator A by locking it to oscillator B in an interesting way that creates lots of new harmonics rather than making the pitch change when you vary the frequencies of those two oscillators. Okay, so switch it off, put oscillator B back on. Okay, moving on to the mixer. Now we're hearing both those oscillators nice and loud because if you look in the mixer, the level of oscillator A and the level of oscillator B are both set to maximum. But of course you can very simply, and as you'd imagine, change those volumes. So I've put them both down, nothing at all. Bring in some B. That sounds nice. Let's go for a kind of a warm pad, so we want a little bit of A. Okay, so volume of the two oscillators is pretty straightforward, and you've got a noise source, a nice bright white. Okay, very simple. So what we're going to do is send the noises from the mixer into the filter, and the filter is what we're going to look at next.
Thanks everybody for watching, commenting and indeed liking. We really do appreciate all the support we get here on our Sonic Academy YouTube channel. So if you found this video super useful, please, we'd love you to hit the subscribe button. We update the YouTube channel every week with new content. And if you want to watch some more relevant content, just click on the videos beside me.